Joining us right now to talk about all of this is House Speaker Paul Ryan. And Mr. Speaker, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for kicking Leisman off the set. I really appreciate it.
Oh, come on.
Oh, you still there?
You think I do?
Come on.
I try.
Becky and guys, good to see you. Becky, welcome back from jury duty. Nice to have you.
Thank you very much. It's great to finally be back. Mr.
Right.
Speaker, let's talk about what's happening. You're voting, your membership is voting tomorrow on this bill, and it just got a lot more complicated with what the Senate chose to do overnight by wrapping Obamacare, a partial repeal of that, of the individual mandate. We've always said tax reform is really, really tough, maybe nothing tougher than health care reform. So by putting those two together, what does that do in terms of what you have to convince your membership?
Well, we don't have it in our bill. As you know, Becky, we've passed that before here in the House. So we've had the House votes to do that. We passed our repeal of the individual mandate back in May. But we never had the votes in the Senate. So what we didn't want to do is make tax reform harder than it already is. But it really is whether or not the Senate has the votes for this or not. So we're seeing what the Senate can do. If the Senate can get it through committee, if they can get it through the floor, then we'll meet them in conference and we'll assess at that time.
Is that something that if they were to pass it through conference, you think it would be no problem with your membership because they've already voted on this?
Yeah, we've passed this 2 or 3 times, most recently in May. So look, do we like the individual mandate? Of course we don't like the individual mandate. But right now we're just focused purely on tax reform from the tax code side. That's the House bill. That's the bill we're bringing to the floor. That's the one we worked out with our members. And there's a lot of things we want to do to improve our bill, by the way, and that's what a conference committee is all about. So this is the way the legislation is supposed to work, the legislative process works. The House passes a bill, the Senate passes a bill, you go to conference, you iron out your reconciliation differences, and that's what we want to do. And there are things we want to do to improve this bill. So we're excited about this process going forward.
That's one thing they wouldn't want to change. You might have, it's a joke, Speaker, but that's one thing you wouldn't change. You might have some other things you don't like that you go to the mat on, but this one, you'd got, if they can do it, you'd say, more power to you.
Look, I'd just say we've already passed it. So
right. Okay, that's what you're saying. That's good. All right.
Interesting. Let's talk about those differences, though. One of the big differences is the state and local taxes. They don't like the idea of rebating any of them. You all have included $10,000 for that, and Mr. Brady has said that he will defend that because he needs it to make sure he gets the votes from all of your membership. What happens
that's a
to
bottom line issue. That is bottom line with us. We have to do that because we have members from these particular states that this matters to. And we want to make sure that taxpayers in not just every income group, but every state gets relief. So we don't want just relief to go to, 46 states. We want relief to go to 50 states. And so that's why we're making sure that we work the numbers. This $10,000 property tax deduction that we allow to continue really does make sure that a person in that kind of category is taken care of. What the CBO tells us, joint tax and all the other analysis says that the average taxpayer in every income group gets a tax cut. I'm sure there are people out there who use a lot of deductions, who have tax lawyers and accountants that may not see it that way. But the purpose of this is to cut taxes for everybody. And so we want to keep doing that. And we know that this SALT fix is really necessary to make sure that that's the case. So, yes, that is one of the bottom lines for the House.
Speaker, I wanted to weigh in on the repatriation issue. I don't know if you got a chance to see the video yesterday. Gary Cohn was at a Wall Street Journal conference with many CEOs from across the country. They were asked to raise their hand in front of him about what kind of capital spending they would intend to do and what kind of wage growth they thought would happen as a result of this repatriation. And very few hands went up in the hall. And my question to you is, if we do have...
So we should just not do it?
Well, my question is, how then are you going to measure success? If we're having this conversation 3 years from now, what is the measure? What is the data point, the metrics with which you would use for success?
Actually, that's a totally legitimate question, I think. First of all, measure success based on the status quo. The status quo is we're the only country left with a worldwide tax system which penalizes companies from bringing their money back. They basically don't as a result. That's why we have $3 trillion of cash parked overseas in the first place. Unlocking that brings that money home, but unlocking that also puts us in a better level playing field by having a territorial system. Combining that with a 20% tax rate, getting us from the last of the country pile, meaning the highest industrial world tax rate, to one of the best tax rates, we really are convinced that that's going to give us faster economic growth, higher wage growth. The Tax Foundation says almost 1 million new jobs, faster GDP growth, and pressure upward on wages, about 4% on average on wages. So that means everybody's after-tax income goes up in this country because of that. So if you're asking me, like, in 2018, it's going to be $600 billion repatriated, and that's going to be used to plant equipment, I can't answer that question. But I do know we're killing ourselves the way we're going right now. I do know that inversions will take off if we don't get this done. We've already seen a rash of inversions. We've already seen a rash of foreign companies buying U.S. companies. We don't get this done. Those companies that are sitting back and waiting for us to fix this tax code, they're going to leave. I know this because I talk to a lot of these businesses. So that's point one. Point two is let's just put our companies in a competitive advantage in the world. Territorial, 20% rate, and full expensing. That's the other thing. So the last point I'd make is when you combine full expensing, which will be effective immediately, with a rate cut, with repatriation, it says the incentive is to invest in America. The incentive is to put your manufacturing in America. The incentive is to take your money overseas and invest it in America because you can write it off. That's why we do it that way, and we believe companies will do that. And
but by changing the law, there are going to be some unintended consequences. One I hadn't thought about before is Tony James from Blackstone made some comments to Ben White where he says the whole idea of strict limits on interest deduction he thinks are very dangerous. He says it will be the only economy in the world that has such a strict limit on deductions. He says U.S. companies will borrow abroad, build a plant abroad, and hire people abroad.
Yeah, I would disagree with that. He may be talking about the 110 rule, which is I won't go into the obscure details, but most countries, and the OECD is doing this, they're doing what we call a thin cap rule. And yes, I know those industries that really do a lot of leverage don't like this, but we are doing an interest limitation on 30% of EBITDA. I know this is Squawk Box, so I'll talk in a wonky way and normally don't
Well, that's good. We like it. We needed it for a subject like this.
Yeah, right. So, but what I'm trying to say, Becky, is most of our foreign competitors are adopting what we call a thin cap rule. If you're thinly capitalized, you can't deduct interest above a certain amount. And the typical amount is 30% of your EBITDA. You can deduct up to 30% of your EBITDA, but not after 30% of your EBITDA.
Okay.
And by the way, that's where the rest of the world is going. And doing that gives us the money we need to lower tax rates across the board and get us a 20% tax rate and a territorial system. So I would say the trade-off is good. It's just for those companies that really want to lever up. You can lever up. That's fine. Go ahead and do that. You just won't be able to deduct all of those interest costs. Right. Because what that does then, we believe it makes us safer and sounder, less leverage, more equity, less debt, healthier economy, and a 20% tax rate.
That's a very thoughtful response. Let me tell you about something else Tony James doesn't like. He doesn't like that you guys are messing with carried interest by changing it to 3 years instead of 1. I don't think you're going far enough. I mean, I think it's income. Why don't you charge it as
So it's
such?
Goldilocks, right? So it's Goldilocks. There are different shades of gray on the policy you can do here. When you get into this issue, what I've learned, and I used to chair this committee, you end up doing a lot of collateral damage and unintended consequences. You could really mess up the real estate markets. There are a lot of things you could really mess up. And that is why what the Ways and Means Committee did with their carried interest policy, their preferred policy, was to extend the period from 1 to 3 years, the holding period. So it's not fast cash, so that it's actual, money that actually stays there in order to enjoy long-term capital gains. For carried interest, you still have the shorter holding period for normal capital gains, but just not for carried interest. We think that's the smarter policy, and we think that's the policy that's surgical and doesn't have a lot of unintended consequences.
Hey, Speaker, you are clearly steeped in all of these details, and I'm afraid to talk about it, but we had an interview yesterday with Diane Black where we talked about carried interest. We asked about carried interest, and it was relatively clear, I think, to most viewers, and I hate saying this, that I don't think she either understood the question or, worse, I don't think she understood what carried interest was and the details of it. And my question to you is more, as you talk to all of the people in Congress, what sense do you have that they have this level of sophistication that you do to actually be able to wade into these issues?
Well, I used to chair the Ways and Means Committee, and I spent my adult life working on tax policy. I was Jack Kemp's tax economist back when I was a young guy. So, some of us just have different expertise. What we typically do in Congress is we look to the people with expertise to set the tone and the tempo and the policy in this area. I look to Mac Thornberry on how to rebuild the military because he knows a whole lot more about it than I do as chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. You specialize in Congress. That's what you do. You can't be a jack of all trades because otherwise you're a mile wide and an inch thick. So you specialize and you look to the people that share your principles, that have your values, on those people who specialize and work with them on those issues. That's just how it works in Congress. That's how it should work in Congress. But to speak, Diane, she knows what she's talking about. She knows these issues. She's a member of the Ways and Means Committee. She's the chairman of the Budget Committee. So my guess is she probably just didn't get the question right.
You saw Virginia. I just want some overall comments, Mr. Speaker, in the whether that, because I'm trying to think about how that would, whether it would embolden or scare Republicans.
Are you talking about politically?
Yes, and I could see it. look, you've tried, you know, you didn't do Obamacare, or the Senate didn't, so, you know, the people that were criticizing that law, they got what they wanted, so that didn't help in Virginia. At this point, don't you think maybe you ought to just, Republicans should be Republicans and do what they said they were going to do? And maybe take your chances with that instead of trying to be all things to all people with feet of clay and like scared. Oh my God, they're criticizing us. This is for the, you know, maybe you actually embolden people to stick to their guns on tax reform instead of wimping out.
We're voting tomorrow, Joe.
You see what I'm saying? Put the Obamacare thing in there. You didn't do it then. You're not going. You know, you'll probably lose anyway in 2008. You always do. You always lose. The party that is on the same side as the president usually loses. So, you know, how about this? Do something before you're not in power anymore.
The House has passed over 380 bills in the first 10 months of the Trump administration.
I know.
More than
the big
Obama,
ones.
Clinton, and the Bushes.
Ones.
We passed the big one. We passed our repeal and replace of Dodd-Frank in the summer.
Okay.
We passed our repeal and replace of health care in May.
This is tough love. I'm not hitting you from the left.
We're bringing our tax reform bill tomorrow. But
hey,
to your point,
DACA? Will you do DACA? Will that get done too? Will that help you in 18 if you do it, or not help you in 18?
We know we are going to do a DACA fix. It's going to have a lot of other things to it, like border and interior enforcement. But let's put that aside for a second. Put that aside. Let me go back to your Virginia question, because you made a good point, which is, we better do what we said we would do. We ran on tax reform. We know there's nothing more we could do that will do more to grow the economy and raise wages, get after-tax incomes up, get economic growth faster, get to a 3% economy. We know there's nothing we can do like this that gets us to this kind of an economy we know we can have.
All right, Speaker.
And so, yes, we said we would do this, and we have to do this. That's the covenant we have with our supporters, with the voters, with the people. And that's why you vote for Republicans. So, yeah, you bet. We need to make good on this promise if we're going to be successful politically.
Okay.
But most importantly, if we want to be successful as a country, we got to get this done.
Speaker Ryan, have you already done the whip count, and are you sure you have the vote?
We feel good where we are. We like where we are.
And second of all, with what the Senate has just done by adding this Obamacare repeal part of it, do you think the Senate has the votes to get passed as well, or have they complicated matters?
I learned a long time ago, don't get in there and speculate what the Senate's going to do at the end of the day or where they are at any given moment. We want them to be successful. We want them to be successful in getting their bill out of committee, getting their bill off the floor so we can get into a conference committee with them. We want to give them as much leeway to go do that. It's just very important at this stage in the process. It's really important. House passes a bill, Senate passes a bill, then we improve the bill and we get the best possible bill in the conference committee. There are improvements on our bill that we would like to make with pass-throughs and a bunch of things. So we want to get to the conference and make these improvements and get the best possible bill.
But
they got to pass the bill, and we have to pass the bill for that to happen. If there are things you'd like to
improve in your bill, why don't you just improve it? You can't get the votes in the House.
We're waiting for scoring. Actually, frankly, it just takes time. We're waiting for scorekeeping and the other issues like that.
Do you expect that you'll have met in conference before the holiday season, before Christmas holidays?
Yes. Yes.
Congressman, Speaker, there are polls that show Roy Moore is back up. And at Alabama, they may elect this guy. What then? And how's that going to work? What
I can't speak to what the Senate's choices and options are.
There you go with the Senate again. You are lucky you're in the House. Don't you ever? I don't think
we're the ones who pass all the bills, right? You remember that. So
they get great tables, and they give great speeches. They give great speech in the Senate, don't they?
In deference, those guys, not in deference, but cut them a little slack. They got to do people. We don't have to do people. They got to do judges and assistant secretaries of this and that, and they've got to do ambassadors.
I want to hear what you really say.
Half their time is passing people through, which takes like up to 30 hours a person, and then they got these crazy filibuster rules that drive us nuts in the House, but it's the rules they have. So they just have a different system than ours. Their system takes longer.
So what
ours
happens?
Is leaner
you
and meaner.
need that seat. Is it better to lose that? There are people now in the Journal and others op-ed saying it'd be better for the Republicans to lose that seat than to have Judge Moore.
The guy should step aside. The guy should step aside because, first of all, these allegations are absolutely credible allegations. So the guy should step aside. If he cares about the people and the values he claims to care about, then in faithfulness to those people and those values, he should step aside. It's just that simple.
Okay. I know that's not your thing, and it's not, you have to ask though because
no, I get it.
It's going to, and it's in the Senate. You know what? Speaker, people are going back and looking at what a lot of victims claim, victims that were discredited before and that were written off. And then there may be some reckoning for some other areas because of this. So if it fixes the situation, maybe there's a bright side to it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for your time today.
All right, thanks for having me back. Take
Good to
care.
see you.
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.